Sometimes, the strongest people don't look like heroes at all. Sometimes, kindness wears a leather jacket and rides a loud bike. It was a quiet morning in a small town, the kind of morning where everything felt still. The sky was pale blue, the air cool enough to see your breath. The streets were wet from last night's rain, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. Birds sat on power lines, and a dog barked somewhere down the street. A little girl named Emma stepped out of her house, holding her lunchbox in one hand and adjusting the strap of her tiny backpack with the other. She was only 8, small for her age, but brave enough to walk to school every morning by herself. Her mother stood at the porch, waving with a tired smile. She worked 2 jobs and hated that she couldn't walk Emma to school, but there wasn't another choice. Emma turned the corner and started down the long street that led to the school. The houses grew quiet. She looked around, no one else was walking that day. Her shoes splashed lightly in small puddles, and for a moment she liked the sound. But then, she remembered the stories. A week ago, her mother had whispered about a man seen near the park, following children as they walked home. Since then, every step Emma took felt heavier. She kept glancing over her shoulder, clutching her lunchbox tighter, wishing someone would walk beside her. Then, from far down the road, she heard it, a deep, low sound that shook the air. The growl of engines, steady and strong. The kind of sound that made most people step aside. But Emma didn't move. She didn't run. She just stood there, eyes wide, heart racing, not in fear, but in curiosity. Most people would have looked away when they saw them. But Emma, she stopped and looked. The motorcycles slowed as they reached the small cafe at the corner. Their engines rumbled like thunder fading into the distance. People sitting by the windows turned their heads, watching with cautious eyes. A few parents pulled their kids closer as the bikers parked their heavy machines by the sidewalk. Jackets with patches, worn jeans, long beards, shiny helmets, they looked rough, loud, and out of place in a quiet town like this. Emma stood across the street, half hidden behind a lamppost. She had never seen so many motorcycles up close. They looked powerful, almost scary, yet something about the way the riders laughed together made her stay and watch. They weren't shouting or being rude, they were just talking, smiling, sipping coffee in the cool morning air. She waited, her heart beating fast. Part of her wanted to walk away, but the bigger part, the brave part, told her to stay. She looked down at her shoes, took a deep breath, and crossed the street slowly. Her small steps barely made a sound on the wet pavement. One of the bikers noticed her first, a tall man with a dark beard and kind eyes behind his sunglasses. He lifted his shade slightly, curious. Emma stopped right in front of him, clutching her backpack strap so tightly her fingers turned red. Excuse me, she said in a quiet voice. The man bent down a little, resting his hands on his knees so his eyes met hers. Hey there, kiddo. What's going on? Emma swallowed hard before speaking. Can I ask you something? Sure, he said softly. What do you need? Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. Would you walk with me to school? Just so I don't feel scared. For a moment, nobody said a word. The bikers looked at each other, unsure if they had heard her right. Then, slowly, the man smiled, not the kind of smile that comes from amusement, but the one that comes from understanding. Yeah, he said, nodding. We can do that. Emma's eyes lit up, and for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. As she walked away, the man called out to the others, still smiling. Tomorrow morning, boys. We've got somewhere important to be. That morning, something special began, a promise that would change all of them. The next morning, the quiet street wasn't so quiet anymore. The sound of engines rolled through the town like a heartbeat. Curtains lifted, doors cracked open, and neighbors peeked outside to see what was happening. 10 motorcycles stood parked in a line in front of a small blue house. Their metal frames shined under the early sunlight, and the riders stood beside them, helmets tucked under their arms, waiting. Emma opened her front door and froze. She couldn't believe it. The same men she had spoken to yesterday were really there. Her mother looked at the group from the porch, unsure of what to say, but when she saw her daughter smile, her fear softened. Emma ran down the steps, her backpack bouncing behind her. Jake, the tall biker with the kind eyes, crouched down and said with a grin, "Ready for school, partner?" Emma nodded shyly. "You really came." "Told you we would," he said. "We keep our promises." They started walking down the street together. The bikes moved slowly behind them, their engines soft and steady, not loud or wild. It looked like an honor guard, tough men and women walking alongside a little girl with pink shoelaces and braids. People on their way to work stopped to stare. Some smiled, others whispered. But Emma didn't care. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't scared. As they walked, she began to talk. She told Jake about her favorite subject in school, her small white dog named Snowy, and how her dad used to fix her bike before he passed away. Jake listened quietly, nodding every now and then. When she said she missed her dad, he didn't try to change the topic. He just said, "He must have been a good man. You've got his courage." Maya, the only woman in the group, leaned closer and tied a small charm to Emma's backpack zipper, a silver wing. "For protection," she said with a wink. By the time they reached the school gate, every student was staring. Emma waved goodbye, and the bikers raised their hands in return. The engines roared again as they rode off, leaving behind the faint smell of fuel and something else, safety. From that day on, the sound of motorcycles in that town didn't mean trouble anymore. For Emma, it meant her friends had arrived. Days turned into weeks, and the sight of the bikers walking Emma to school became a normal thing in town. Every morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, the low hum of engines filled the street, and Emma would step outside smiling, her backpack swinging behind her. The neighbors, who once whispered behind curtains, now came out to watch. Some waved. Some even took pictures. What started as a strange sight slowly became something beautiful. At school, the other kids couldn't stop talking about it. "Is it true you come to school with bikers?" they'd ask, their eyes wide. Emma would nod, a little shy but proud. The teachers noticed the change too. She was laughing again, doing her homework on time, even raising her hand in class. The fear that used to hide behind her smile was gone. Her mother, who at first worried what people might think, began to see the good these strangers brought. Every morning, before leaving for work, she'd hand Emma her lunchbox and look toward the street, where the bikers waited patiently. She'd nod at them, a small thank you in her tired eyes. Jake always returned the gesture with a respectful smile. One rainy morning, the school principal called Jake to her office. He walked in, dripping water from his jacket, expecting trouble. But instead of anger, she had tears in her eyes. "You probably don't know this," she said quietly, "but Emma lost her father last year. He was a police officer. Since then, she hasn't slept alone or spoken much. But since you started walking her to school, she's been smiling again. So, thank you." Jake didn't know what to say. He just nodded, his throat tight. Outside, when he told the others what the principal said, no one spoke for a moment. Then Rick, one of the older bikers, looked down at his gloves and said, "Guess we're doing something right for once." From that day on, the group changed. Rick started visiting his son more often. Maya stopped drinking and began helping at a local shelter. Even Jake noticed something inside him shift. They had always called themselves brothers and sisters, but now, they felt like protectors. And every morning, when Emma ran toward them, waving with that bright little smile, they realized something powerful. They thought they were the ones protecting her, but really, she was the one saving them. It was a gray morning, colder than usual. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds that promised rain. Emma stood by the window, zipping up her jacket as the familiar sound of engines rolled through the street. She smiled, knowing her friends were there. Her mother kissed her forehead, reminding her to stay close to the bikers and hurry home after school. Outside, the group waited, their headlights glowing faintly in the mist. Jake waved as Emma ran down the steps. "Morning, partner," he said, his voice calm as always. Morning, she answered, gripping her backpack straps. Together, they began their walk, the bikes moving slowly behind like a line of gentle giants. The streets were quiet, too quiet. Even the usual barking dog was silent. Rain started to fall, soft at first, then steadier. The air smelled like wet asphalt and fuel. Emma walked close to Jake, kicking small puddles as she talked about a story she'd written in class. But then she stopped mid-sentence. Up ahead, near the corner, a man stood beside a car. His gray jacket was soaked, his face hidden beneath a hood. He wasn't moving, just watching. Jake noticed right away. He felt a cold twist in his chest. The man's stance was too still, too tense. Then, as Emma took one step forward, the man started walking toward her. Everything happened fast. Jake stepped in front of Emma, raising his arm to stop her. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The bikers behind them revved their engines once, a warning sound that filled the street. The man froze, but then tried to move again. Before he could get close, two bikers rushed forward, blocking his path. Another pulled out his phone and called the police. Emma's heart was racing. She could feel Maya's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "You're okay, sweetheart," Maya whispered. "We're right here." The man tried to step back, but Jake moved fast, grabbing his wrist and holding him still until the police arrived. When the officers took the man away, they confirmed everyone's fear. He was the same stranger who had been following children near the park. Emma stood in the rain, tears mixing with the drops on her face. She looked up at Jake and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled, brushing a strand of wet hair from her forehead. "You don't have to thank us," he said softly. "You're family now." That day, the town finally saw the truth. The people everyone had judged as dangerous were the ones who had kept their children safe. And for the first time, the sound of motorcycles didn't make anyone step aside, it made them feel protected. By the next morning, the whole town knew what had happened. The story spread faster than anyone expected. Motorcyclists saved little girl from stranger. It was on the radio, in the local paper, and on everyone's lips. People who once crossed the street to avoid the bikers were now stopping to thank them. Some even left coffee and donuts on their bikes outside the cafe. For the first time, the group felt truly seen, not as troublemakers, but as protectors. At school, the principal held a small assembly to honor them. The gym was filled with students, teachers, and parents. The bikers stood awkwardly near the stage, unsure what to do with so many eyes on them. Jake looked more nervous than he had during the whole incident. He tugged off his gloves, cleared his throat, and stepped forward. "I'm not much of a speaker," he began, his voice deep but shaky. "People look at us and see danger. They see tattoos, bikes, and noise. But being strong isn't about how loud your engine is or how tough you look. It's about standing up for someone who can't." That's all we did. The gym fell quiet. Emma sat in the front row, her eyes wide and full of pride. When Jake finished speaking, the principal wiped a tear and led the crowd in applause. The sound filled the whole hall. Some of the bikers smiled shyly, others looked down, hiding how moved they were. Emma ran up the steps and hugged Jake tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For making me feel safe." Jake knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "You don't need to thank us," he said softly. "You reminded us what it means to care about someone." The other bikers nodded, some blinking fast to hold back tears. Around them, everyone clapped again, not because of the rescue, but because of the kindness that had grown from it. That morning, it wasn't just Emma who felt safe. The whole town did. When the bikers left the school that day, the kids waved from the windows, and the sound of engines that once made people afraid now made them smile. The group rode off slowly, their jackets shining under the sun, and for the first time, the town saw them for who they truly were, ordinary people with hearts big enough to make a difference. Years passed, and the little girl everyone once saw walking with bikers was no longer little. Emma had grown into a young woman, studying at a university in another city. But one summer, she came back to her hometown. The place looked smaller now, quieter, older, but it still felt like home. As she walked through the familiar streets, memories rushed back, the sound of engines, the laughter, the safety she used to feel every morning. She stopped outside the same cafe where it had all begun. The bikes were still there, not as many as before, but enough to make her heart skip. The chrome didn't shine as bright, and the jackets were more worn, but the smiles were the same. Jake was sitting at a table, his beard grayer, his hands rougher, but when he saw her, his eyes lit up like no time had passed. "Emma," he said, standing up in surprise. She nodded, smiling wide before running over to hug him. The other bikers gathered around, greeting her like family they hadn't seen in years. They talked for hours, sharing old stories, laughing at things that once felt like small miracles. Before leaving, Emma reached into her bag and handed Jake a folded letter. "I wanted to give you this," she said softly. Jake opened it and read the words written in her neat handwriting. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. You taught me that kindness doesn't need armor, and family doesn't always come from blood. You gave me courage when I didn't have any. Jake didn't say anything for a moment. He just nodded, his eyes glassy, and pulled her into another hug. You gave us just as much, kid, he whispered. You reminded us that even the toughest hearts can be soft. As Emma walked away, the sound of the bike started up again. It wasn't loud or wild, it was steady, like a heartbeat, familiar and warm. She turned back one last time and saw them riding down the same road they once walked together. The sunlight hit the chrome, and for a second, the whole street glowed. In that moment, Emma understood something she would never forget: you don't have to be big to do something meaningful. You just need a heart brave enough to care. And sometimes, that's enough to change an entire town.